Then Brooke looked surprised when she heard that I am the owner of Capsule Corp, and she said that can't be true, he's so young and handsome. And then I said, well, me and my company have even found ways to halt aging and even cure cancer and heart disease. To be honest, we are pioneers of innovation, and so am I, and also I have magical powers and superpowers. And then Jeff said, bullshit. And then I said, no, not bullshit, because you see I can actually prove that I have magical and omnipotent powers, and I can also completely control all matter. And then Jeff said, show us. And then I asked all of them, are you sure you want to see what I can do? And then they said yes. And then I said, like I told you before, I have magical powers and omnipotent powers, meaning I can completely control all matter. And then I magically made Pizza Hut pizzas appear out of thin air, and I also made many Pepsis appear, and I can pretty much bring anything into existence, even another me. And then I copied myself right in front of them, and then I said I have all the powers of a god. And then I started creating things in my hand that should be impossible. First I created a real miniature earth, and then I created a miniature moon, then a miniature sun, and then I gave Allie the moon. And then I said, I can give you the moon, darling. And then she said, this feels amazing, it feels cold. And then Allie said, this is the most incredible thing I've ever seen. And then I said, my powers have no limits. Not only am I rich, but I am also truly powerful, and I was born into this world for a reason, because I am destined to save it despite all of its flaws. And then I told everyone the harsh truth. I said, this universe is what beings like me call a dark universe, and it's what you call a monster universe, and that's what a dark universe is exactly. So when someone says they are from a dark universe, right away you will know they are actually saying they are from a universe full of monsters. In other words, your earth is filled with monsters that want to kill you all, and basically I'm here to make sure that doesn't happen. I'm a great equalizer sent to restore balance, so to speak. And then they all just stared at me, not blinking, and Allie and the rest of the women I had sex with just looked at me and smiled warmly. And then I said, one other unique thing about me is that my children will all grow up very fast to become adults. And then all the women asked, how long does it take for your children to become adults? And then I said, my children usually become full-grown adults within a month of being born. And then Allie said, well, at least I won't have to buy diapers for very long. And then I said, thanks Allie, that's a very positive way of looking at the situation, but that's not the only thing. Since all my children are pretty much born gods, they have super intelligence, which means they learn everything very quickly, and they already know everything they need to know. And then Sienna Shaw said, it sounds wonderful. And then I said, well, it is, and things only get better from here. And since all of you ladies, well, except for Brooke of course, you ladies are all having my children, and I now consider you family, which means you will all have certain great privileges. And then Allie asked me what kinds of privileges, and then I said, well, I'm a omnipotent god. I'm sure you can use your imagination as to what that means for you, so pretty much anything your little heart desires I can give you. And then Allie said, well, you have a good point actually. And then Allie said, let me think about what I want. And then I said, take your time. And then Allie said, well, I want mom to be rich and I want to be immortal. And then I said, okay darling, did you want to stop aging at 24 years old or what? And then Allie asked me, you can do that? And then I said, yes ma'am. And then I said, okay, and I waved my hand around Allie and her body glowed bright, and I said, done. And then Sienna Shaw said, oh, do me? And then I said, sure darling. And then I gave Sienna Shaw immortality at age 24. And then Annie Thompson said, I want to be young again. And then I said, ma'am, that's not a good idea, because people will start asking you a lot of questions about how you became young so quickly. People will get suspicious, but I can make you immortal, Annie Thompson. And then she said, okay, do it please. And then I also made Annie Thompson immortal. And then Brooke said, what the hell, can't I have immortality? And then I said, you're not my girlfriend, therefore I have no obligation to help you. And then Allie stuck her tongue out, and then I said, I made you all truly immortal, so if someone tries to murder you all again, they won't be able to kill you, and your aging will stop at 24 years old, but no one will be able to kill any of you regardless. And if any of you want anything else from me, let me know. And then Allie said, yes, please copy yourself. And then I said, sure. And then Allie said, come with me. And then Sienna Shaw and Annie Thompson said, we are coming too.